Hey guys, it's Kat and I have a better ZBrush tutorial of the scroll ring. So what I'm going to be doing is starting out with Simple Brush and choosing a cylinder 3D. Now you can click and drag in the middle of the stage and then immediately press the T key to go into an editing mode. So this gives us a basis of our ring and what we can work on. So the next step is to make this smooth. As you see here, this cylinder is really kind of choppy on the sides. It's got a lot of faceting. If we go over to the right-hand side and choose Show Polyframe or Draw Polyframe, you can see the little lines here on the surface. And that will show us the outline of the polygons that are making up this particular primitive. So the next step is to go in and modify this. We need to smooth out the sides and then turn this into something called a Dynamesh object, which is going to give us a nice even grid that we can create our ring. So anyway, so if we wanted to go in and start sculpting right now and we clicked on this, it'll give us an error, which tells us that we need to be using the Make Polymesh 3D button to make this an editable object. So click out here somewhere to get rid of that. Go to the top over here and look for your Make Polymesh 3D button that's under the Tool section. Click on that, and as long as you have the polyframe turned on, you can see that this turned a different color, which is basically something called a poly group. We'll deal with that more a little bit later. We can turn that off now because our next operations are going to be to smooth this out. We don't need to see it yet. But if I go to the right-hand side and choose Subtool, I'm sorry, not Subtool, but if I go to the Geometry palette over here, if I click Divide 3 times, it will smooth this out. So let's do that. You can click 1, 2, 3, and then see we have a nice smooth cylinder. So that's working well. Now, if I were to immediately Dynamesh this, it will do something a little bit funny. It makes the grid not as pretty. In fact, let's go ahead and try it. I'll show you what happens. Just watch mine. Don't do this yourself. But if I go in and Dynamesh right now, it'll ask me if I really want to do that. I say yes. It goes back to this view, and I don't want that. So let me undo and go back to where we were. This step will help it maintain its smoothness. So go back up to the top of the Geometry palette where it has this slider here where it says basically 4. If I were to use this slider and go back down, you can see that ZBrush has retained all of those different levels of smoothness, but I don't need them. If I click Delete Lower, and now I Dynamesh, it will be smooth. So then go down here to the bottom of this palette, actually midway, I guess, and click Dynamesh, accepting the 128 resolution that it's provided. And it still looks smooth, so better than what we did last time. But if I turn on this polyframe and go look, a couple things concern me. One is that this mesh, although it's fine, is not fine enough for what we're going to do. I could also look up here under the active points, which are about 67,000. And that's a little bit low for what I'm going to be working in. So you can undo. And let's do a different Dynamesh operation. First of all, let's use the Polish button, and it'll result in a lot cleaner grid. And then let's change this resolution here to 256. Hit Enter, and now click the Dynamesh button. What you see is that this is now jumped up to about 270,000 points, which is a good resolution. Okay, we have enough polygons here to work with, and you can see that this is a really nice clean grid under here. It's tiny, but it's perfect. So I'll zoom out. Let's go ahead and turn off the grid. We don't need it anymore. And now we need to stretch this vertically. But let's talk about the axes for just a minute. If I go over here to the top and click on Move, you can see that it brings up this gizmo, and that basically shows me my axes. Straight up and down in this case is going to be green. If I hover over the red arrow, that's the X. And if I click on the background and drag a bit, you can see there's a blue one. If I hover over the blue, it's Z. Now, in the beginning, when I got started with ZBrush, I actually put a little Post-it note on my computer that said Y was green, X is red, Z is blue. And that helped me to keep things oriented nicely. But when you look at this, you can see that there is, we have I guess the y-axis is where we want to stretch. Click and hold on this little green rectangle here, click and drag up. We just want to make that maybe 1.4 or so. You'll notice a ratio at the bottom, and that will give us plenty of room to work on our ring. Now, because we were stretching the mesh, we need to re-Dynamesh and actually make it nice and clean again. So to do that, we'll hold down Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, click and drag on the background, and then that will redistribute our mesh. It also brought our size up to about 324,000, but we have a nice big cylinder that we can use. So now that you have this set with the gizmo visible, I want the X facing over here to the left, and then the Y top, like up to the top. If yours isn't situated like that, click and drag. And then when you get close to the side you want to look at, press the Shift key and it will lock in on a side view. But the correct orientation right now is going to be green up, red to the left, and then you can kind of see the blue in the middle. And that will be a good reference, so when we all start doing some of the mirroring and symmetry, that we're all using the same axes. So let's see. So the next step is to mask off the rough shape of our ring. So I'll switch back to the draw mode. You can also press Q, and that will also allow you to switch back to that mode. And now we're going to be using a mask function. So if I hold down Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, I'm looking up here for this pen. And what I want to do, I guess, is I'll switch. So click on that mask pen and switch it to mask curve. And it'll end up giving you this type of curve here in the second position, and that's what we need to make our ring. We don't have symmetry turned on yet, though. So let's go up to the Transform menu and activate Symmetry. And then we need to switch the axes. So we want symmetry being up and down, which is on the y-axis, and we don't need the x-axis anymore. So that tells us we have symmetry on the y-axis, which will show something like this. Now you need to determine about what the width of the band is at the back, okay, at the back of the ring shank, and get that kind of eyeball it here. So it's about that wide, and then go off the side. Now hold down Command or Control, click, and then drag up, and you'll see an angle is showing up over there on the left. And I want to make this about 80 degrees. And I'm just eyeballing it. Yours may be different. So that gives me a thinner size on the back here, and it's a lot wider on the front. I'm not really feeling it here on the back. I think I want it a little bit thinner. So to get rid of that mask, hold down Command or Control and draw a box. Now do what we did again to figure out how wide do we want the back, and then go right off the edge. I might go a little bit smaller, hold down Command or Control, about 80 degrees, and then do that. And it's a little bit thinner on the back, so that would be comfortable, and this front is a little wider and more dramatic. The next step is to switch this mask. So right now we've masked off the upper and lower part, but not the ring itself. So to switch that, hold down Command or Control and click once on the background, and then the ring is now masked. And that's going to be important because when we extract it, it's going to be extracting anything that is masked off, so anything that's dark. Now I want to use the mask tool again, but hold down Command to bring up the mask options. On this top position, let's go back to our mask pen. And that gives us this nice clean stroke. And with that, we can click somewhere down here on the lower right-hand side. And if you hold down Option or Alt, it will turn that box white, which means it's going to remove part of the mask. Okay, so just release. And you can see that that eliminated the part of the mask. You can also change this. So say if I want my ring to start further back down here on the side, all I have to do is turn to the side, and remember, hold your Shift key, hold down Command and Option, click, and then drag over, and then shave off a little bit of that. Now turn to the front, press the Shift key, and see if it's what you want. And I think that actually looks pretty good. So we'll switch to the side view, more of a side view. And now we're ready to start drawing our design. So I'll zoom in a tad bit, and I want to switch my mask tool. Say if I hold down Command or Control, I want it to be this pen again, but I'd also like to I'd like to get really nice smooth curves. So right now, if I were to just draw a bit on this, it looks good, pretty good, but couple things. Notice that this mask is much sharper along the edge, and this one has very blurry edges. So since we've got two different types of brushes here, let's go ahead and fix that. We'll do a Command Z, which will take that away. Hold down Command or Control, and look up here for the focal shift. What that does, if you see this yellow circle here, the bold yellow line on the outside is the outside bounds of the brush, but the inner circle shows where it's fading. It'll be solid in the middle of that circle, and then it fades out to the bigger one. So let's go up to the focal shift and move this all the way down until your cursor looks like this. And that just means that it's going to have a sharper edge when we start drawing. I'll also decrease the size a little bit, something like that. And then let's go up to the stroke menu up here. And I'm looking for something called Lazy Mouse. Again, I am holding down Command or Control because I'm modifying a masking brush, not a regular brush. So if you're modifying the mask brush, you have to hold down Command or Control while you go to these menus to adjust the stroke. So look for Lazy Mouse, turn it on. Let's decrease Lazy Mouse down here to about 0.01 or so. And then the lazy radius should be about 30. What this does is as I draw, if I start down here now, you'll see that there's a little tiny red leader. That it's following my cursor. It's not actually where my cursor is that it's drawing. So the drawing is actually following the cursor, which makes it easier to do scrolls. And looking over here, I realized that I didn't do something I should have. So let's undo. And go back up here to the Transform menu. And I might need to check my axis again. So let's turn the Move mode on. And then look for the axes. So I need this to be on the Y-axis and also on the Z-axis. So that's the symmetry I need. Let's go back to Transform and look for Y and then also Z. Let's go back out here, switch to the Move mode. And now you can see that I have symmetry up and down as well as left to right. And I might also decrease the size of my brush just a tad. And now hold down Command or Control. I'll start down here somewhere and just draw, a nice swirl. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We'll be fixing this a little bit later. Now again, hold Command and Control, and I'm just going to blend some of this in and make these contacts nice and wide. You want this to actually touch right here, just so it's a little bit sturdier. I could draw another swirl. And I see that it's kind of touching here, so I'll go ahead and help it out and actually connect that, and maybe even make something like this at the top. And over here, I think I want to put an area for stone, so it'll be a round stone. So I just filled that in. And that gives me the basis for my ring. And I don't know if it's picking it up on the audio, but my computer, which is a laptop, is now starting to run the fan. I'm on a MacBook Pro. But anyway, that looks pretty good. Notice that we've got nice sharp edges here. There's a little bit of messiness, but we'll fix that in one of the next steps. So the operation we're using to actually extrude this ring out from this cylinder is called the extract function. And it's found over here under the subtool palette, which is second. Scroll down to the bottom and look for extract. And I need to adjust the thickness here. I can use the slider, or I can just click on it and type 0.12. And I just know that from experience and hit enter. Turn off double because that makes the extract come towards you, but also a second version of it goes towards the interior of the ring, and we don't want that. And T-border is just not something we use in this technique. So I've turned off double and T-border, and then I've adjusted the thickness. Now if we clicked extract, and then immediate click accept, you'll see there's our ring. If you don't click accept right away, the ring will disappear. So I'll show you what that looks like just in case it happens to you. But I'll just turn visibility off of the ring so it goes away. But imagine I click extract, and then I'm so excited about it, I click and drag, and it goes away like that. So just know that if you've ever done that, the trick is to re-extract and click accept immediately. Now I can go back to my ring and turn its visibility on and turn the visibility off of the cylinder. We don't need it now. You can keep it back here in the background. In fact, I usually will save one of these as a subtool in my light box that I can then bring in and start over on a ring. So this looks pretty good. I do see that there are some little triangles here that may not cast correctly. So I think what I'm going to do is go back to this original cylinder, turn off the visibility of this ring, and I'm going to fill these in. So I'll just hold down Command or Control and basically just fill it in. And then I'll re-extract. So go down to the bottom. Settings are all still the same. Extract and accept. And now if I were to click on this bottom one, okay, and turn the visibility off on the other one, this is the one with the holes. I don't need it anymore, so I'll delete it. Click always OK. And what I'm left with is the one that had covered those holes. And the thing is, we just don't want holes that are too tiny because it won't cast correctly. So this looks pretty good. Now, if you look carefully over here, there's some variation here on the top edge of the ring. And we're going to be smoothing that out with something called Polish by Features. So under the deformation palette, you can see Polish by Features is there. But if you're on my interface, I actually put it over here in the bottom. You want to click this little tiny dot over on the right-hand side and open it up to an open circle, because that will allow the polish to be more effective. So you'll click and drag, and just kind of click and drag a few over until you see things smoothing out, and that looks pretty good. So there we have the basis for our ring. To clear this mask, what you do is hold down Command or Control, click and drag on the background, and then you'll be left with your ring. If I zoom in though, let's take a look at what's going on underneath. I use this quite a bit, but look for the poly frame over here. So click on that to take a look at your underlying mesh. And you can see that anything that was extruded out, these are long rectangles. But if you look at the front, this is a grid. So if we start sculpting, we need this whole thing to be a grid. Therefore, we need to basically put a new mesh over this entire model. So I'll zoom out and turn off the mesh and take a look again at this thing called Dynamesh. So you can either look at it under the geometry palette, or I have it down in my interface. But let's go ahead and accept the default, which is 128, and click Dynamesh. If I scroll in a little bit, or not scroll in, but zoom in, you can see that the edges of my model are pretty rough. So I'm going to undo. That's a resolution problem. So let's change our resolution to say like 160 and hit enter. Now click Dynamesh again and see what happens. It's still a little bit pixely, so let's undo again. Let me try something like 256 and hit enter. Also, let's take a moment to look up at our active points, which are about 155,000 or so. When we click Dynamesh, if it goes up here to about 250, that's a good place to be at. So this one is at 233,000. If I zoom out, this looks actually pretty clean. So I think that's a good starting resolution. Also, we can at this point, if you want to, we could select this other cylinder and delete it, but I'll just leave mine active for now. It shows me that my total points, this is the total points of the two subtools together. So the active one is the ring at about 233, but you can see that the cylinder is a higher resolution, and those two together equals 567 or so. Like I said, I don't have my glasses on, but that's it. Now we're ready to start sculpting, and this is the part that is kind of fun. I'll also show you a new feature of ZBrush 2018 that should make this a little bit easier. So when I'm in the draw mode, there is an icon over here called Activate Sculptress Pro mode. So let's go ahead and turn that on while we're sculpting. And I'd like to choose a brush over here, so maybe something like clay buildup. And I don't want this square. I mean, there are some tutorials out there that will just have you use the clay buildup with this little square-shaped brush. And here's what happens. So you get these sharp edges here, but I don't want those. I'll undo. I'm just going to click on the alpha and turn it off. And what that does is it gets me a lot softer brush that I can use. We do have symmetry turned on, so the only thing left to do here then is to go back in and start applying our brush. And I don't like what it's doing there, so I'll start over here, maybe even bump my size down a bit. There we go. So I'll just click and drag. And notice how this is kind of hard to keep it in a nice fluid line. Undo, and let's try something else. Go up to the stroke menu, and we've got lazy mouse on, although the lazy mouse radius is pretty small, so let's bring this up to about 30. And I'll move the, not even sure what this one is, the step, lazy step, down to something like 0.001. Now we can just go ahead and click, and it's doing some weird stuff. I think it's because I'm not going fast enough. Let me turn the intensity down just a tad, and that's going to be the height. So now if I click and just sort of draw a swirl in here, and I can go clean that up a bit. I'm also having a hard time with this one because I don't have my Wacom pad attached. I'm doing this with a mouse. But you can just basically go through your design and add some sort of design that you'll have as your raised design. And then back up here, something like that. And it looks kind of messy, but that's okay. As you hold down the Shift key, you can start smoothing these in a little bit. Could even increase the size of your brush a tad. And you can see it doing its magic now. I'm just smoothing the edges. In fact, you can smooth the other edges here. We'll start blending these in together. And also you can use the Option key or Alt key to sort of carve that. And ooh, it doesn't like that. It's a little bit much. And what it's doing is it's giving me that lazy mouse. I think I don't like that as much. You go to stroke, and I'm going to turn down the lazy radius a bit. Maybe increase my size, press S and increase that. And then do this. And I think in some of this, it's actually that it's with the new dynamic Sculptress mode. I'll go ahead and turn that off, and that should also make it a little easier. There we go. And I'll explain more about that Sculptress mode later. But I can tell that my mesh is very, very fine on here. And I do see it. Part of what Sculptress is doing is it's allowing me to use a finer mesh. I don't have to go in and subdivide or anything like that. It's automatic. But let's say that I just want to give it a new fresh mesh that's clean. So I have the resolution at 256 and Dynamesh is turned on. So find an open space, hold down Command or Control, and re-Dynamesh by dragging a box. This is now going to be easier to work with. So on here I can just blend it in, hold the Shift key, like that. Yeah, and I think Sculptress was probably not the best one to use for the moment, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty cool. So I might need a little more material here. Something like that. But it's just a process of going in and smoothing all this out and getting the design that you like. And I'm not liking this over on the end, but I'm just going to go with it for now. This is just a demo. So anyway, work on your ring for a bit. You can watch me. I'm going to put this in a faster motion here. But I'll show you another technique that I use when I'm making the scroll ring. And that technique is I'm using the Move tool, which will allow me to make more graceful curves. That's why I don't pay as much attention to how smooth those curves are at first. To get to the Move brush though, I click here and then look down wherever for the Move brush. There it is, it's towards the middle. Or you can get to it by pressing B as in boy, M as in Mike, V as in Victor. So the Move tool will behave differently depending on the size. So if I make this something like a 60, 62, I can move parts of this and kind of finesse those little curves a bit. But if I want it to be a graceful curve, I can increase the size pressing S and then go in with a much wider brush, and that gives me nice graceful curves. Now if I wanted to move part of the whole ring, let's say I want to move this up and make it more pointed, I can zoom in, increase the size of my brush, let's say to 124 or so, and now I can move whole areas. If I go even larger, I can move this whole section of the ring up. So you can just play around with that until you get the size you want. One other trick too is if you wanted to make kind of a little ruffle on one of your curves, you could also make that size much smaller. And then you're just pulling like a little bit at a time, kind of nudging, and then you could pull something like this. And that's done with a smaller brush. So that's looking pretty good. And one other thing, another trick I can show you, let's say you're sculpting and you're having trouble because you're hitting the back of the ring. You can also hide the back of the ring. So turn to the side and press the Shift key. And you have to think about the part of the ring you want to keep. So let me actually just rotate it this direction. Again, I'm holding the Shift key to lock in on the side view. And now holding Command Shift or Control Shift, make sure Select Rect is selected up here. Click and drag and draw a box, and everything in the green box is going to be kept. And now the back of the ring is temporarily missing. You can then work on your ring, and when you're done, all it takes to get it back is hold down Command Shift or Control Shift and click on the background, and it comes back. So Select Rect allows you just to hide the back temporarily while you work on things. Or what if I wanted to put my maker's mark on the back? I would hold down Command Shift or Control Shift and maybe just isolate this part, put my maker's mark here, and then bring the rest of the ring back by clicking on the background with Command Shift or Control Shift. So that's it, but you're just going to go through and make changes to this and, you know, make these little curves more graceful. that. And then you could bring in a stone setting, or, even put in a little bezel setting, which is something I do. So I have another tutorial up here on YouTube that tells how to make a bezel, and then you can add the bezel to this as well. So I won't go into it on this particular one. But let's say I also want to do one more thing, which is I want to make this band a little bit thinner at the bottom. So let's imagine that my ring is pretty much finished, and I need to bring in another cylinder, make it smooth, and subtract it. So I'll go to the append function that's over under the subtool palette, append another cylinder, and then click on it. Oh, and if I lose visibility of the ring, just go click its eyeball. So there I have a cylinder. It is very chunky looking though. So let me do that trick again where we divide. So divide 1, 2, 3. I also use the key command. The shortcut is Command D or Control D. So I did that. And then I'll go down to geometry. And I don't even really need to delete those lower levels here, but let's just do it for good practice. So delete the lower levels. And now I need to stretch this vertically. So switch to the move mode. Click on this green rectangle and stretch it out. That looks pretty good. And now we have basically a ring mandrel. But to get this right, what we'll do is we're moving it down just a little bit. In fact, we could increase its size slightly if we want. Just a tad. And then we'll work with real measurements in some of the other tutorials. Something like that. And then we could switch to our ring and flatten it just a tad. I'll show you what I mean. So you go to the subtool palette, find the ring, and make it active. And then let's use this red rectangle here just to shrink it slightly. And so that makes it hug it. But again, this is a little bit thicker, and then this is thinner. And now we need to subtract. So the ring that we've been working on, is already a Dynamesh object. And because of the way I have my interface set up, you can see Dynamesh right here. So at a glance, I know it's a Dynamesh. I'm going to be subtracting this cylinder from it, but the cylinder it doesn't matter if it's Dynamesh or not. I just need to click this third icon here, which looks like a little moon. Make sure that the cylinder is underneath the ring layer. Select the ring. You'll go down below and choose merge, and then merge down. This is always a little bit confusing, but it's going to give you an error that says always okay. Yes, it's fine. And then it adds the two things together, which is not what we wanted. But the trick to this is that you have to re-Dynamesh it one more time. So hold down Command or Control, click and drag on the background to re-Dynamesh, and then it subtracts that cylinder. And you can see on the inside now, and looking at the profile, that this does get slightly thinner at the back, and then the front is a lot thicker. And I guess before you go any further, you could go ahead and do a polish crisp edges on this. So it's down in the deformation palette, or I have it here in my interface. So I might go in here and polish crisp edges. Again, you want to click on that little O. That will make it so it's more effective. And then click and drag over maybe 2 or 3. And you'll see that it starts to smooth out this interior and also smooth these edges. If you want, you could go a couple more times, maybe up to 4 this time. But do notice that it is affecting your design a bit. But you can go back and then start doing the final stuff on your ring. So I think that should be enough to get you started on this style of ring in ZBrush. There are some good tutorials out there of folks who are very detail oriented. But again, something to notice, right now I'm working at about 200 30,000 points, I think it is. So this model is not very high resolution. It is good enough. In fact, if you're sending off to Shapeways or something like that, they will require that you have something that's under 1,000,000 points. So or not 1,000,000 points, 1,000,000 polygons. So your points are going to be sort of relative to that, but you can kind of get an idea of how complex it is. If you get to the point where you start sculpting, there's other brushes you can use as well. So one that I like a lot, I guess there's Damn Standard. So if you made your brush size a lot smaller, and let's say you wanted to maybe do a design like this. Wow, that was weird. So you can start adding some detail here, like that. But notice that this is a little bit pixelated. In that case, what you want to do, let's undo a couple times. But let's say I have Damn Standard, and it does show me that Sculptress is available for this. So I could click on the Sculptress icon and start drawing again, and it gives me a little bit smoother thing. And the reason is the Sculptress feature, if I turn this polyframe on, everywhere that I sculpt with a brush, it's actually giving me more mesh, so it'll work better. However, if I go back and Dynamesh again, it'll wipe that out and it'll be pixelated. But as long as you're in the final parts of your design, you could go in and start using something like the Damn Standard brush, or any of the other brushes. Not all of them have the Sculptress feature, but you can turn it on and off while you're sculpting and get some of those details to work. This is actually probably not something I'd put in a design, because with these high spots right here, then if there was a patina, this would probably get lost. But just know that you can go in and add some scroll work. If you are doing scroll work and you want it to be extra smooth though, remember you can come up here to your stroke and play around with your lazy mouse. And then, there we go. So it's giving me that little leader. It makes it easier to do smooth curves. Just know that sometimes these are not deep enough, so you might have to do something like bump up your intensity to make sure that you have a design that's going to show up once it's printed. All right. So yeah, get a chance to explore some of these tools. My favorites, again, are going to be things like the Clay Buildup and Damn Standard. There's another one that you can download. It's called Clay Fill. I'll try and put a link below for that. But anyway, that is the newer version of doing the scroll ring, and I hope that makes it easier for you in ZBrush. Thanks for listening.